The world of Necromunda is a labyrinthine wasteland of steel, fire, and despair. A sprawling hive city, it towers above a barren landscape, its countless layers a testament to centuries of industrial expansion. The hive's upper echelons glisten with the wealth of noble houses, but far below, beneath the layers of light and opulence, lies the Underhive, a chaotic abyss where lawlessness reigns supreme. It is a realm ruled not by order, but by survival, where the forgotten and discarded carve out brutal existences in the shadows. The Underhive is a place of extremes. Toxic fumes hang thick in the air, machinery churns endlessly, and darkness seeps into every crevice. This is not merely a battleground for rival gangs or desperate scavengers. It is a hunting ground for the monstrous. Here, in the toxic sludge and rust-choked ruins, terrifying creatures stalk the shadows, feeding on the unwary and adding to the relentless dangers of life in this forsaken domain. To understand the horrors of Necromunda's Underhive, one must first grasp the scale of its desperation. Resources are scarce, and violence is currency. Over centuries, the hive's industrial waste has mutated both the environment and its denizens, giving rise to horrors that defy logic. These creatures are not just products of random evolution. They are shaped by the cruelty of their environment and the neglect of a society that deems the Underhive unworthy of salvation. In this dark and forgotten world, survival is not guaranteed. Monstrosities lurk in the unlit depths, their forms twisted and their behaviors unpredictable. Some are ancient predators that have existed for generations, while others are the result of grotesque experiments or uncontrolled mutations. They are stories whispered around campfires and written in blood across the walls of the hive. As we descend into this grim abyss, we will uncover the most terrifying monsters of the Underhive. These creatures are more than just adversaries. They are embodiments of Necromunda's darkest truths. Through their stories, we will glimpse the raw, untamed savagery of a world where humanity teeters on the edge of its own extinction. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness, where nightmares are born and fear takes form. This is Necromunda's Underhive, a place where the monsters are not just creatures, but reflections of the horrors that humanity has wrought. Welcome to the depths. In the Underhive of Necromunda, survival is a brutal endeavor, shaped by the interplay of desperate factions and lethal monstrosities. Each group within this nightmare ecosystem holds a unique place, whether as predator, prey, or a force striving to impose some semblance of control. Understanding the roles of these participants provides insight into the complex dynamic of terror that unfolds within these darkened depths. The first to be considered are the scavengers and drifters, those who have chosen or been condemned to live at the mercy of the Underhive's unrelenting dangers. They are not united by creed or purpose, but by their shared vulnerability. Some wander in search of salvage to trade for food and water, while others flee their past lives, seeking refuge where none truly exists. These individuals rarely last long on their own, often becoming the first to disappear when something stirs in the shadows. Next are the outlaw gangs, whose ruthless ambitions fuel much of the Underhive's bloodshed. Driven by territorial disputes, vendettas, and the pursuit of wealth, these gangs consider themselves masters of their domains. But even the most battle-hardened leaders speak in hushed tones of the things that cannot be fought with bullets alone. The gangs are both hunters and hunted, often unknowingly serving as bait for the horrors lurking in the dark. Their brutal hierarchies and need for control push them to clash with one another, but in the face of the worst monstrosities, even their bravado can falter. Beneath the gangs in terms of visibility, but no less significant, are the mutant clans, groups of individuals warped by toxic exposure, radiation, and generations of genetic decay. These mutations can range from relatively harmless deformities to grotesque transformations that blur the line between man and beast. Some of these clans revere the creatures of the Underhive as totemic symbols or vengeful spirits. To outsiders, these mutants are abominations, but to their own kind, they are a brotherhood that finds strength in shared suffering. Many believe the monsters of the Underhive to be avatars of divine wrath or harbingers of impending doom. Then there are the Dome Runners, guides who navigate the twisting, crumbling tunnels and collapsed sectors of the Hive. They are indispensable to those who wish to traverse the Underhive's labyrinthine expanses without becoming hopelessly lost. Despite their skill and knowledge, even they are not immune to the dread that accompanies certain areas. Their accounts of encounters with subterranean monstrosities spread like wildfire, their tales serving as both cautionary legends and grim warnings to those brave, or foolish, enough to venture into forbidden zones. The Guilders, representing the interests of commerce and control, also play a critical role. They dispatch heavily armed convoys into the depths in search of rare resources, such as archaeotech, rare minerals, or mutated biospecimens. These convoys often come with their own hired enforcers, mercenaries equipped with advanced weaponry and a hardened resolve. However, all the firepower in the world is not always enough to overcome the sheer terror of what dwells in the dark. The Guilders' relentless pursuit of profit sometimes leads to catastrophe, with entire expeditions vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only haunting legends. Overseeing the Underhive's law and punishment are the Enforcers, agents of what passes for justice in Necromunda. Armed with brutal weaponry and clad in imposing armor, they venture into the depths not out of curiosity, but as part of their grim duty. Yet, their stoic resolve is often tested to the breaking point when they confront the true horrors lurking beneath. The Enforcers symbolize the thin, fraying line between order and chaos, though they too have been known to retreat when faced with the incomprehensible. The miners and industrial workers who labor in the deep shafts and forgotten manufactories are another essential piece of this grim tapestry. For many of them, the mechanical grind of their toil drowns out the ominous sounds of distant movement or sudden silence. Yet, their grim realities often place them at the mercy of the Hive's darkest inhabitants. Entire work crews have been known to vanish overnight, their fates whispered about in fearful speculation. Finally, there are the creatures themselves, beasts born from mutation, experimentation, or ancient horrors awakened from slumber. Unlike the human participants of the Underhive's ecosystem, these monsters are driven by primal instincts or malevolent cunning. Some are territorial predators, defending their lairs with brutal efficiency, while others seem to hunt for the sheer thrill of carnage. Their presence shapes the behavior of every living thing in the Underhive, as the constant threat of their sudden appearance keeps even the boldest souls wary. Each of these participants, the gangs, scavengers, mutants, guilders, enforcers, miners, and the monsters themselves, contributes to the ever-shifting power dynamics of the Underhive. Their interactions, both intentional and incidental, create an ecosystem of fear and violence. Yet, in this world of shadows and terror, the line between hunter and hunted can shift in an instant. Understanding these roles reveals the intricate and fragile balance that defines life in Necromunda's bleakest depths, a balance that is all too easily shattered by the emergence of something far more monstrous than anyone had imagined. The descent of Necromunda's Underhive into a haven for nightmares was not the result of a singular event, but rather the culmination of countless eras of neglect, exploitation, and the relentless march of industry. The origins of the horrors lurking within its depths can be traced to the very foundation of the Hive itself, a world shaped by humanity's unyielding hunger for expansion and profit. When the first layers of Necromunda were constructed, no thought was given to the long-term consequences of such rapid growth. The lower levels became a repository for industrial runoff, toxic waste, and failed experiments, creating the perfect environment for unnatural life to take root. The layers of the Hive began to crumble under the sheer weight of centuries of construction. Entire sectors collapsed, trapping countless inhabitants beneath the rubble and creating vast, sunless mazes of forgotten corridors. Some survivors adapted to their bleak new reality, while others were consumed, either by their environment or by what they encountered in the blackness. These sealed-away areas became incubators of death, giving rise to creatures that knew nothing of the world above but learned to thrive in darkness. What began as isolated events of mutation or predation soon spiraled into something far more sinister as generations of change hardened these life forms into apex predators. Another contributing factor to this evolution of monstrosities was the unchecked spread of biocontamination. Necromunda's industries were built on experimentation and innovation without oversight. Chemical spills, failed genetic modifications, and escaped lab specimens seeped into the underlevels like a poison into a wound. Illegal research projects, abandoned when they went horribly wrong, left behind nightmarish remnants, half-formed creatures that continued to evolve independently, free from human intervention. In some cases, experiments meant to enhance human survival in harsh conditions instead produced something grotesque, and those errors were banished rather than destroyed. The Underhive absorbed every mistake, nurturing them into horrors that now define its most feared legends. Generations of political indifference also played a role. The ruling houses of Necromunda focused their resources on maintaining control of the upper hive, often ignoring the chaos below until it threatened their own power. Efforts to pacify the Underhive were typically half measures, short-lived purges that did little more than scatter the threats deeper into the hive's lower regions. The survivors of these purges learned to adapt, growing stronger and more elusive. This cycle of failed eradication bred not only resentment among the hive's human inhabitants, but also a deeper resilience in its monstrous population. The Underhive's ecosystem was further corrupted by the planet's natural instability. Necromunda's surface is a desolate wasteland ravaged by deadly storms, and these environmental upheavals frequently send tremors through the hive itself. Entire levels collapse without warning, opening ancient vaults and exposing forgotten breeding grounds of lethal organisms. The hive's infrastructure, riddled with decay, can barely withstand these tremors. With every seismic shift, new pathways to danger open, and hidden horrors are set loose to roam previously uncharted sections. One of the most significant catalysts for the proliferation of these creatures has been the constant influx of desperate people from the surface. Refugees, exiles, and outcasts flood into the Underhive in search of sanctuary, bringing with them diseases, unknown life forms, and rumors of dark places best left undisturbed. As desperate scavengers delve deeper, they unwittingly awaken things that should have remained buried. Explorers driven by greed or fear often open ancient access routes sealed off for good reason, releasing apex predators into sectors long thought safe. These breaches allow creatures to spread, leaving once thriving zones lifeless as their inhabitants are devoured or driven mad. The spread of uncontrolled mutations also owes much to the influx of rogue traders and black market smugglers, who use the Underhive's lawless corridors as staging grounds for their clandestine operations. Rare Xenos flora and fauna, brought in for illegal trade or bizarre rituals, have escaped into the depths, where they thrive amid the polluted ruins. The introduction of non-native species has thrown the Underhive's already tenuous food chain into chaos, as aggressive foreign predators displace or hybridize with local life. The result is an ever-shifting array of hybrid monstrosities with no natural predators, growing more dangerous with each generation. Another layer of horror is added by the reckless scavenging of ancient archaeotech. The Underhive is littered with the remnants of forgotten ages, ancient machinery, decaying servitors, and forbidden relics from a time before the Imperium's rise. Scavengers, often ignorant of the dangers they unearth, disturb machines long dormant or awaken constructs with programming corrupted by millennia of isolation. Some of these relics have fused with organic matter, creating cyborg monstrosities whose purpose is no longer clear, but whose capacity for destruction remains intact. Ultimately, the proliferation of these terrors was inevitable in a place like Necromunda, where greed, neglect, and desperation form the foundation of daily life. The Underhive's creatures are not accidents. They are the natural outcome of a world where survival demands adaptation at any cost. The sins of the Hive's creators and rulers have festered, giving rise to predators that care nothing for borders, laws, or the ambitions of those who dwell above. The deeper one goes, the more the Hive reveals its darkest truth. The monsters below are not aberrations, but reflections of the environment that birthed them, thriving in a world where everything else crumbles. The rise of the terrifying creatures in the Underhive unfolded through a grim series of events that shaped the nature of life beneath Necromunda. These developments did not occur in isolation, but were interconnected with the cycles of growth, collapse, and survival that define the Hive world. The following stages mark the key moments that solidified the Underhive's reputation as a breeding ground for monstrosities. The first notable phase began when entire sectors of the lower Hive fell into ruin. Structural decay from centuries of unchecked expansion caused vast portions of the lower layers to collapse, sealing off vast stretches of tunnels and domes from the rest of the Hive. In the aftermath, isolated zones became breeding grounds for nightmarish creatures. The absence of human interference allowed these life forms to multiply and evolve unchecked. Some were scavengers at first, small parasitic organisms feeding on industrial waste. Over generations, they grew into formidable predators, their instincts shaped by the hostile, unlit environment. This era of isolation also coincided with the unchecked spread of industrial contamination. Efforts to salvage parts of the ruined sectors often led to unintentional exposure of both humans and wildlife to toxic chemicals, further accelerating mutations. Minor reports of strange sightings increased, but these warnings were dismissed as the ramblings of desperate workers. Rumors spread among scavengers of strange, chittering sounds and massive shadows moving through the wreckage. Each report marked a growing realization that something unnatural was evolving far from the reach of the upper levels. The next major phase occurred during a period of territorial expansion driven by the rival gangs of the Underhive. Seeking to outmaneuver their enemies, these factions ventured deeper into unexplored sectors, unknowingly disturbing long-dormant habitats. This triggered a series of brutal encounters that reshaped the balance of power in the Hive. Entire squads of gangers vanished during expeditions, leaving behind only bloody remnants or scattered bones. In response, factions began to arm themselves with heavier weaponry and flamers, hoping to cleanse these regions, but instead, they found themselves locked in an escalating struggle against an enemy they barely understood. The disappearance of several guild-sponsored convoys marked the third phase of this grim development. Wealthy industrial guilds, desperate to exploit the mineral-rich depths, sent expeditions laden with advanced drilling equipment and heavily armed escorts. These convoys vanished without a trace, fueling suspicion that rival gangs were responsible. Retaliatory strikes between factions followed, worsening the chaos and drawing more attention to the mysterious disappearances. However, when recovery teams found scenes of devastation that defied explanation, hardened soldiers torn apart as though by massive claws, the true nature of the threat began to emerge. One of the key turning points came when larger and more organized hunting parties were dispatched into the depths to eliminate the growing threat. These parties often included experienced dome runners and bounty hunters skilled at surviving the hostile environment. Early successes saw the elimination of some feral beasts, which were dragged back to settlements and displayed as trophies. Yet, this triumph was short-lived, as each victory was met with an even deadlier wave of attacks. The creatures seemed to learn and adapt, developing new hunting strategies that overwhelmed even the best-prepared squads. As the Underhive's more remote sectors became synonymous with death, entire settlements were forced to abandon their homes. The migration of these displaced groups caused friction with more established enclaves, leading to outbreaks of violence and starvation. These refugee waves inadvertently spread tales of the horrors they had encountered, massive, multi-limbed beasts that tore apart machinery as easily as they shredded flesh, eyeless hunters that struck from above, and swarms of smaller, venomous creatures that moved with terrifying coordination. the mounting dread added a layer of fear to even the most hardened communities. The expansion of scavenging operations into ancient sealed zones marked another critical phase. Desperate for valuable resources, tech seekers unearthed buried vaults and collapsed manufactories thought lost to time. Some of these vaults held forbidden experiments from bygone eras, their contents never intended to see the light of day. Whether through greed or ignorance, these vaults were pried open, releasing horrific results. These events escalated into major incidents, with entire districts quarantined or wiped out to contain outbreaks of newly unleashed monstrosities. The final phase of this grim timeline was characterized by containment failures. Efforts to establish fortified outposts in key areas faltered as new predators overwhelmed defensive positions. Reinforcements sent to re-establish control were slaughtered or driven into retreat, leaving entire zones abandoned. The term Death Dome became synonymous with regions where attempts at settlement or exploration were suicide missions. Despite the carnage, certain groups, including rogue archaeologists and thrill-seeking bounty hunters, still ventured into these forbidden zones, driven by the lure of ancient treasures or the challenge of confronting the Hive's deadliest threats. In this brutal progression of events, the Underhive transformed from a dangerous slum into a domain of terror where the line between predator and prey blurred. The creatures born from this evolution became not just symbols of the Hive's decay, but also testaments to its resilience. Each stage of their emergence reinforced the grim truth that in the darkest reaches of Necromunda, survival hinges not on strength alone, but on the ability to adapt to a world that has turned its back on humanity. The key turning point in the grim saga of Necromunda's Underhive monstrosities occurred during a catastrophic event that would later be referred to as the Descent of the Maw. This event did not happen by chance. It was the direct result of escalating desperation from the Guilders, Enforcers, and various power players who sought to reclaim lost sectors and re-establish control. It began with a high-stakes operation sanctioned at the highest levels of Necromunda's ruling elite to confront and neutralize the creatures that had claimed entire districts. However, this bold decision became the catalyst for a disaster that reshaped the Underhive's future. The plan itself was a demonstration of hubris. A massive multi-faction coalition was assembled, consisting of Enforcer precinct squads, mercenary guild legions, dome runners, and even hired bounty hunters. The operation aimed to penetrate one of the most heavily infested zones and eradicate the horrors within. This district, known ominously as Black Hollow, was notorious for the complete absence of survivors from previous ventures. It had become a forbidden place, where whispers spoke of living shadows and unearthly roars that echoed through the tunnels. Despite these warnings, the coalition pressed forward, driven by the promise of untapped riches and ancient relics within the heart of the dome. At first, the operation seemed to progress as planned. Armed with heavy flamers, shock grenades, and seismic charges, the strike teams pushed through the outer corridors, encountering resistance that was brutal but manageable. Several of the initial waves of smaller predators, ranging from swarms of acidic vermin to reptilian stalkers, were incinerated or driven into deeper recesses. Spirits were high among the advancing troops. Some even speculated that the myths surrounding Black Hollow were exaggerated. The tide shifted suddenly when the coalition reached the core chamber of the Hollow, a massive vaulted expanse partially submerged in a lake of chemical runoff. What the strike teams encountered in that moment redefined the scale of terror in the Underhive. Rising from the toxic mire was a creature unlike anything previously reported, a massive segmented leviathan covered in chitinous armor, with tendrils tipped with jagged claws and bioluminescent sacs that pulsed like a heartbeat. Its emergence was accompanied by an eerie, bone-rattling hum that resonated through the dome, disorienting even the most hardened warriors. Panic rippled through the ranks as the beast surged forward, its bulk displacing waves of sludge and knocking over armored vehicles like they were toys. Coordinated commands broke down as soldiers scrambled to hold their ground. Flamethrowers roared to life, their jets of fire illuminating the cavernous chamber, but the creature's armored carapace absorbed the flames with little more than a smoldering scorch. Conventional weaponry proved equally ineffective, with high-impact rounds failing to penetrate its hide. As the Leviathan lashed out, entire squads were swept aside, their bodies hurled into the chemical lake or crushed against the cavern walls. In a desperate bid to regain control, the commanding officers ordered the detonation of the seismic charges they had brought to collapse portions of the dome and trap the creature beneath the rubble. However, this decision proved to be both a tactical and moral failure. The charges detonated as planned, but the resulting destruction destabilized the entire dome, causing massive sections of the ceiling to give way. Instead of containing the threat, the collapse created a chain reaction that triggered seismic tremors throughout the surrounding sectors. Tunnels split open, walls caved in, and waves of toxic sludge flooded nearby zones. The devastation forced the surviving strike teams to abandon the operation and flee. Communication systems failed as the tremors severed relay points, cutting off any chance of coordinated retreat. Those who managed to escape carried tales of an unstoppable horror that was now free to roam beyond its original confines. In the aftermath, Black Hollow became a ruin of shattered infrastructure, buried horrors, and an even greater sense of dread. It was no longer a fixed location on the Underhive's maps, but a spreading nightmare zone that threatened to engulf neighboring regions. The failure of this operation marked a critical shift in the perception of the Underhive's creatures. What had once been regarded as isolated threats were now seen as part of a broader, more interconnected system of predation. The Leviathan was not merely an aberration. It was a symbol of the Underhive's unchecked evolution into a realm that could no longer be controlled by conventional means. The ruling guilds and enforcers, having suffered immense losses, withdrew resources and abandoned plans to reclaim further sectors, effectively ceding large portions of the Underhive to chaos. For the inhabitants of the lower levels, this turning point was both a tragedy and a grim revelation. The realization that some zones could never be reclaimed reshaped how settlements viewed their survival strategies. Fortifications became more common, and alliances between gangs that would have once slaughtered each other on sight began to form in the face of a common threat. However, many understood that no barricade could hold back a force as relentless and adaptable as the horrors they now faced. The descent of the Maw cemented the Underhive's reputation as a place where humanity's arrogance and greed had unleashed something that could no longer be contained. The event became a cautionary tale throughout Necromunda, a reminder that in the depths of the Hive, the line between predator and prey can shift in an instant, and the monsters that dwell below are not just creatures of instinct, but symbols of the Hive's unraveling fate. The emergence of the Underhive's most terrifying monsters left a profound and far-reaching impact, not just on the daily lives of Necromunda's inhabitants, but on the very perception of survival and control within the Hive city. Entire sectors became synonymous with death, marked as forbidden zones where only the reckless or the desperate dared venture. The legends that grew around these cursed places fueled fear across the Hive, reinforcing the notion that some areas of the Underhive were lost to humanity entirely. One of the most immediate effects was the physical isolation of vulnerable settlements. Communities that once relied on precarious trade routes and shared resources became cut off as pathways through the Underhive fell to the horrors lurking below. Traders, messengers, and scavenging teams who attempted to maintain connections often vanished, leading to economic collapse in some enclaves and forcing survivors to become entirely self-sufficient. This isolation bred mistrust, with neighboring settlements viewing each other as both potential allies and desperate threats in the fight for survival. The loss of critical supply lines had a domino effect on the Hive's fragile economy. Industrial production slowed in key sectors as materials from the lower levels became impossible to retrieve. Guild-sponsored expeditions, already risky ventures, now required exponentially more resources and manpower, making them untenable. In turn, the noble houses that profited from the Underhive's resources tightened their grip on what little remained. This imbalance further deepened the divide between the privileged upper levels and the forsaken depths below, with the Underhive becoming a symbol of decay and despair, a grim reflection of the wider Imperium's systemic failure to address the suffering of its lower classes. The psychological toll on the Underhive's inhabitants was just as devastating as the material losses. Fear became a constant companion, etched into every decision and interaction. Stories of monstrous ambushes and entire families dragged away in the dead of night transformed from cautionary tales into grim realities. The pervasive terror stifled attempts at recovery, as even the most battle-hardened gangs hesitated to venture into certain sectors. These haunted zones became like scars on the Hive's map, reminders that no amount of firepower could guarantee safety against the unknown. This growing atmosphere of dread also shifted the cultural landscape of the Underhive. Superstitions flourished, and survival became as much about rituals and charms as it was about ammunition and fortifications. Certain gangs and settlements adopted new belief systems, revering the monstrous entities as manifestations of divine punishment or heralds of a new age. Some saw these creatures as omens, believing their rise signaled the collapse of the Hive itself. Cults formed around these interpretations, their followers seeking to appease or even join the monstrous forces they viewed as avatars of inevitable destruction. The militarization of settlements followed quickly in response to this existential threat. Walls were reinforced with salvaged steel, watchtowers were erected at critical choke points, and traps designed to deter or destroy predators became common features. Yet this arms race against the horrors of the Underhive brought its own complications. Resources that could have been used for food, medical supplies, or basic survival were instead diverted toward defense. In some cases, settlements were weakened internally, collapsing under the strain of maintaining their defenses. Those that could not sustain the effort often fell prey to raiders or the very creatures they sought to keep out. The guilders and enforcers, in response to mounting pressure from both the Upper Hive and the Underhive's desperate enclaves, adopted harsher policies. Entire regions were declared quarantine zones, with anyone found crossing into or out of these areas treated as threats. These containment measures, meant to prevent the spread of both biological contamination and panic, led to brutal crackdowns. Innocent workers and scavengers caught on the wrong side of containment lines were executed without trial to maintain order, further deepening the resentment among the lower levels. Some settlements, cut off by these measures, were left to fend for themselves against the encroaching monstrosities, creating a grim cycle of abandonment and annihilation. The impact of the Underhive's creatures extended beyond Necromunda itself. The stories of entire expeditions lost to nightmarish beasts spread through the Imperium via rogue traders, bounty hunters, and deserters who managed to escape. These accounts, exaggerated or not, added to the already notorious reputation of Necromunda as one of the deadliest Hive worlds. The planet became a place of morbid fascination, drawing the attention of off-world bounty hunters, archaeologists, and scholars eager to witness or exploit the horrors firsthand. However, most who ventured into the depths with dreams of fame or fortune met the same grim fate as those who came before them. Despite the catastrophic consequences, some factions sought to profit from the chaos. Smugglers and rogue tech collectors trafficked in the remains of slain creatures, offering their chitinous hides, venom sacs, and bioengineered organs to buyers interested in rare and exotic materials. The bodies of these monsters became coveted commodities in the black market, fueling a dangerous trade that encouraged scavengers to hunt creatures far beyond their capabilities. In some cases, this led to the spread of monstrosities to new sectors, as inexperienced hunters disturbed nests or captured live specimens that later escaped. Perhaps the most profound impact of these events was the shift in the perception of the Underhive itself. It ceased to be seen merely as a place of lawlessness and poverty, and became a representation of existential dread, a reminder that the Imperium's most dire threats do not always come from distant star systems or Xenos invaders. The horrors of the Underhive were a product of humanity's neglect, greed, and blind ambition. This realization, however faintly acknowledged, spread among the lower classes of Necromunda, fueling disillusionment and rebellion. To some, the monsters lurking below were not just predators, but symbols of a world that had turned its back on those it deemed expendable. Ultimately, the emergence of these terrifying creatures reshaped the Underhive in ways that extended far beyond individual sectors or settlements. The once chaotic struggles of the gangs and guilds took on a new, darker dimension, defined not just by greed or survival, but by the ever-present threat of annihilation. The Underhive's very identity changed, becoming a place where every shadow could conceal a nightmare, and every decision carried the weight of life or death. The legacy of these creatures was not simply fear. It was the stark reminder that humanity's worst enemies are often born from its own folly. One of the most compelling aspects of the monsters that inhabit Necromunda's Underhive is how uniquely adapted they are to their environment. Unlike ordinary predators, these creatures are the living embodiment of the Underhive's hostile and ever-changing ecosystem. This adaptation has led to intense speculation and debate among hive inhabitants, bounty hunters, and even off-world scholars regarding the origin, purpose, and terrifying capabilities of these monstrosities. A frequently discussed topic is the sheer resilience of Underhive predators. Many of these creatures display a remarkable resistance to toxins, corrosive substances, and radiation, conditions that would kill most living organisms. This has led to theories that some of the monsters may have evolved from failed industrial experiments designed to create biological workers or combat organisms capable of surviving the harshest environments. The creature's biology seems perfectly attuned to the hive's noxious landscape, often featuring traits like reinforced exoskeletons that can withstand extreme pressure, adaptive camouflage that blends into the corroded walls, and heightened senses that allow them to navigate in pitch-black darkness. One particularly feared trait that some of these creatures share is their ability to sense bioelectric signals, a form of detection similar to how some predatory species detect their prey's heartbeat. This has fueled stories of monsters that can hunt humans even when they are completely silent and hidden. Hive dwellers often speak of monstrous shadows lurking just out of sight, drawn to the faintest biological rhythms. This trait has given rise to survival strategies where Underhive settlers cover themselves in insulating material or shut off all machinery to avoid detection, though the effectiveness of these methods remains questionable. Another subject of fascination within the Necromunda community is the predatory hierarchy within the Underhive. Despite the chaos of the environment, there is evidence that some creatures coexist or even compete with one another for dominance. Hive rumors tell of battles between massive predators, with entire settlements wiped out in the collateral destruction. Accounts of such encounters often describe cavern floors littered with the remains of smaller creatures and damaged gang weaponry, evidence of titanic struggles between entities fighting not just for survival, but to become the apex predator. These monstrous conflicts have become almost mythologized, with some scavengers returning from the depths telling tales of skeletal remains so large they could not be fully excavated. One of the most widely discussed phenomena is the existence of creature migrations. Although the Underhive is largely a series of confined tunnels, certain sections open up into massive, hollowed-out domes large enough to support entire ecosystems. It is in these zones that large swarms or packs have been observed moving as a single coordinated mass, shifting from one part of the hive to another for reasons that remain unknown. Some theorize that these migrations are driven by environmental shifts, such as collapsing ceilings or chemical spills, while others suggest a more sinister purpose, perhaps the pursuit of prey or the escape from something even more dangerous deeper below. The bizarre regenerative properties of certain Underhive creatures have also sparked intense speculation. In many of the more fearsome accounts, hunters report that even after suffering catastrophic wounds, such as severed limbs or impalement, some creatures continue to fight. There are even tales of monstrosities seemingly regrowing lost appendages after vanishing into the depths, returning to haunt the same corridors months later, stronger and more aggressive than before. Some hive dwellers believe that the Underhive itself nurtures these creatures, as though the environment is alive and conspiring to protect its most brutal inhabitants. One particularly infamous aspect of Underhive monsters is their unpredictability. Unlike many predators that follow clear hunting patterns or routines, some of Necromunda's horrors are defined by erratic and often inexplicable behavior. Entire patrols have been stalked for days without attack, only to be slaughtered suddenly when they appeared to be safe. Others have noted creatures that seem to exhibit bursts of intelligence, such as cutting off escape routes or luring prey into vulnerable positions. This unpredictability has led many to view these creatures as more than mere animals, giving rise to countless theories about their origins. Some speculate that they may have been bioengineered with artificial intelligence that has degraded into something cruel and feral over time. The topic of hive-specific evolution is also heavily discussed. Unlike other hive worlds, Necromunda's Underhive has developed an ecosystem almost entirely unique to itself. Creatures found in one part of the Underhive may not exist in another, with some sectors hosting life forms that are biomechanically distinct from anything else within the hive. There are countless reports of mutated ambush predators with traits perfectly suited to their local environment, such as creatures that mimic piles of scrap metal until prey comes close, or beasts that swim through chemical rivers as easily as others walk through air. These localized adaptations make the Underhive's ecosystem incredibly diverse, adding an additional layer of danger to anyone attempting to map the area. The most contentious topic, however, revolves around whether the Underhive's most dangerous entities are natural evolutions at all, or something deliberately created. Rumors of ancient experimentation facilities buried deep within the hive persist, fueling conspiracy theories about ancient Mechanicus vaults or genetic labs that predate Necromunda's industrial age. Some claim that the monsters are remnants of forbidden projects meant to create super soldiers or biological defense systems that were abandoned after going out of control. The idea that the creatures could be the result of past human interference rather than random mutation lends an unsettling element to their existence. It suggests that their terrifying power was never accidental. Finally, a topic that consistently sparks debate is the possibility of communication or cooperation among certain types of monsters. While most predators are solitary hunters, there are accounts of swarms or packs that display a disturbing level of coordination. Theories abound as to whether this is instinctual behavior or evidence of a shared intelligence. Some hunters claim to have witnessed creatures signaling each other or responding in unison to specific stimuli, an observation that raises chilling questions about the true nature of these beings. If such creatures possess even a rudimentary form of communication, it could mean that their strategies, and by extension their threat, are far more advanced than previously believed. These unique aspects of Necromunda's Underhive monsters continue to captivate and terrify those who dwell in its shadows. The more people learn about these creatures, the clearer it becomes that they are not simply predators born from mutation. They are a living reflection of the Underhive itself, shaped by its chaos, strengthened by its toxicity, and perfectly designed to survive its endless horrors. Among the many figures drawn into the deadly dance between humanity and the horrors of the Underhive, a select few have become legends, individuals whose encounters with the monsters of Necromunda have elevated them to near-mythic status. These figures are often defined by their resilience, cunning, and sheer refusal to accept death, even when confronted with the Underhive's deadliest predators. One of the most infamous monster hunters is Col Marek, known across the Underhive as the Black Hound. Marek was once an enforcer, a leader of purging squads tasked with reclaiming lost territories. His reputation was built on ruthless efficiency and an unrelenting focus on results. However, everything changed after a catastrophic mission in the depths of the Gristle Warren Dome, where his entire team was slaughtered by a pack of biomechanical predators rumored to have been remnants of ancient experiments. Marek was left for dead, his body broken and scarred. Yet against all odds, he survived and emerged with a new purpose: to hunt down and destroy the monsters that thrive in the darkness. Marek's strength lies in his unshakable will and his intimate understanding of predator tactics, but his obsession has alienated him from potential allies. He often operates alone, unwilling to trust anyone after the betrayal he believes led to the massacre of his squad. Another renowned figure is Kira Voss, a former Dome Runner turned monster tracker, often referred to as the Silent Strider. Voss is revered for her unmatched ability to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels and crumbling domes of the Underhive. What makes her particularly notable is her eerie calm in the face of unimaginable terror. She moves through predator-infested zones with an almost supernatural grace, evading detection and outmaneuvering even the most cunning beasts. Voss has made it her mission to map the hunting grounds of the most dangerous creatures, believing that knowledge and preparation are the only true weapons against the unknown. However, her strength is also her greatest vulnerability. Her reliance on precision and stealth means that she often avoids direct combat, which has led some to question whether she can be relied upon in the heat of battle. Still, her insights into the habits and migration patterns of Underhive predators have saved countless lives. A more controversial figure in the Underhive's history is Halak Morn, the self-styled Beastkeeper of Sorrow's Hollow. Morn is not a hunter, but a self-proclaimed tamer of the Underhive's monstrosities. According to rumor, Morn was once a rogue genitor, experimenting with biomodification before he was cast out for conducting forbidden research. Rather than flee the Underhive's depths in fear, Morn embraced them, developing a twisted philosophy that the creatures below are the true rulers of the Hive. He claims to have developed methods for pacifying and even controlling certain predators, and stories circulate of scavenger bands that have witnessed him leading packs of feral creatures like a grotesque shepherd. While some dismiss Morn as a lunatic, others fear the possibility that he has indeed learned how to manipulate the monsters. His weakness lies in his hubris. He believes himself immune to the dangers of the beasts he surrounds himself with, and many suspect that his downfall is inevitable. Still, Morn's knowledge of the Underhive's creatures is unparalleled, and some desperate souls have even sought his counsel in the hopes of surviving the depths. Then there is Jarek Ironjaw Thren, a legendary bounty hunter whose reputation is built on his brutal resilience. A towering figure clad in reinforced scavenger armor, Thren is known for facing creatures head-on, relying on raw strength and firepower rather than cunning or stealth. He earned his nickname after surviving an encounter with a mutant worm that shattered his lower jaw, which was later replaced with a metal prosthetic capable of crushing bone. Thren's approach to monster hunting is simple: overwhelm the predator before it can strike. His arsenal includes custom-built grenade launchers and flame-spewing cannons, making him a one-man fortress. However, his reliance on overwhelming force has its limitations. He often underestimates the complexity of his prey, and his brazen tactics have led to devastating losses. Despite this, Thren remains a feared and respected figure, embodying the idea that brute strength can still carve out a place in the Underhive's chaos. Another enigmatic figure is Lyra Kael, a former scavenger who became infamous for surviving a massacre at the hands of an entire swarm of tunnel gorgers, a species notorious for devouring entire settlements. Lyra's survival came at a cost. She lost an arm and suffered extensive injuries, but the experience left her with a deep understanding of swarm behavior. Now known as the Swarm Breaker, she leads specialized teams focused on eliminating hive-nesting creatures before they can spread. Lyra's strength lies in her analytical mind and her ability to out. The mysteries surrounding the terrifying monsters of Necromunda's Underhive are as vast and twisted as the labyrinthine tunnels themselves. Despite centuries of exploration, research, and countless tales from survivors, many fundamental questions remain unanswered, fueling endless debate within the Hive's communities and the wider Imperium. These lingering enigmas have become a source of fascination and dread, with each theory deepening the unsettling reality that the true nature of these creatures may never be fully understood. One of the most hotly debated questions is whether these creatures are truly native to Necromunda or if they originated from some external influence. Some scholars and rogue archaeologists suggest that the Underhive's most dangerous entities may be remnants of ancient experiments conducted during the Dark Age of technology. The presence of ancient derelict laboratories and biodomes buried deep within the hive has led to speculation that these monstrosities were not natural evolutions, but engineered creations left to mutate in isolation. This theory raises uncomfortable questions. If the creatures were indeed created, what was their original purpose, and how much of their current behavior is instinct versus residual programming? Others argue that some of the more bizarre predators resemble known xenospecies, suggesting that rogue traders or smugglers may have accidentally introduced alien life forms into the hive, where they adapted and flourished. Another point of contention revolves around the nature of beast intelligence. While most monsters in the Underhive exhibit behavior consistent with predatory instinct, ambushing prey, marking territory, and defending nests, there have been numerous accounts of far more coordinated actions that seem almost strategic. In some instances, monsters have been observed cutting off escape routes, herding prey into traps, and even feigning weakness to draw in overconfident attackers. This has led to theories that at least some of these creatures possess a rudimentary form of communication or shared consciousness. The possibility that certain predator species could be capable of collective thought or learning is a terrifying prospect that challenges the assumption that brute force alone can overcome them. However, without concrete evidence, such claims remain speculative, dismissed by some as exaggerations or the delusions of trauma-stricken survivors. The existence of rumored alpha predators has further fueled this debate. Many believe that for some of the more organized predator swarms, there must be a singular, more intelligent creature acting as a leader. Sightings of massive, unique beasts, often described as larger and more cunning versions of their species, have contributed to this theory. These so-called alphas are thought to possess the ability to direct their lesser kin with a purpose that borders on tactical precision. If true, this would imply a terrifying level of complexity within the Underhive's ecosystem, where not all creatures are simply feral killers, but part of a broader and more coordinated survival network. One of the darkest and most persistent theories concerns the possibility of further depths below the already labyrinthine Underhive. Some argue that the monsters currently known to hive dwellers may only be surface-level predators compared to what could exist in deeper, sealed-off catacombs and ancient vaults. The Underhive's constant collapses and shifting geography have occasionally revealed vast, previously hidden chambers, some containing evidence of life forms unlike anything documented. Explorers who have ventured into these uncharted zones have rarely returned, and the few who did often spoke of impossible horrors lurking far below the known levels of the hive. This has led to speculation that the Underhive itself is layered atop something even older and more dangerous, with the monsters above serving as harbingers of what might one day surface. Theories surrounding the hive's living ecology also raise disturbing questions. Some biologists argue that certain species of Underhive creatures seem too symbiotic with their environment to have evolved independently. These theorists propose that the Underhive itself may act as a kind of biological incubator, with its chemical pools, fungal growths, and strange bioorganic residues playing a role in fostering life forms that feed on the hive's decaying infrastructure. The idea that Necromunda's Underhive is, in some ways, alive, feeding and nurturing its own predators, has become an unsettling point of discussion. Supporters of this theory point to reports of strange, pulsing growths in the deepest domes that resemble organic tissue, claiming that these hive nodes are evidence of something greater. Whether these are merely bizarre fungal infestations or part of a larger biological network remains unknown. Another unsolved mystery revolves around the so-called death migrations. There are recorded instances where entire swarms of predatory creatures have been observed abandoning their usual hunting grounds and moving en masse to other areas, often without any apparent reason. These migrations have preceded some of the Underhive's greatest disasters, leading to speculation that the creatures possess some heightened sense of environmental shifts or threats that humans cannot perceive. Some even suggest that these migrations are triggered by the emergence of more powerful predators, with the swarms fleeing to avoid extinction. This raises the question of whether humanity is even capable of understanding the full ecological dynamics at play within the Underhive. Perhaps the most unsettling theory involves the notion that the monsters of the Underhive are not entirely separate from humanity. While most assume that these creatures are the product of extreme mutation or foreign origins, some posit that certain species may have once been human themselves. The Underhive's history of genetic experimentation, exposure to mutagenic substances, and harsh living conditions lend some credence to this theory. There are accounts of vaguely humanoid figures among the predator classes, elongated, deformed creatures with remnants of human-like features. This leads to the horrifying possibility that some monsters are not natural-born predators, but descendants of long-forgotten hive dwellers who were twisted into something unrecognizable by their environment. If true, this would mean that every generation of settlers, scavengers, and workers risks becoming part of the monstrous legacy of the Underhive. Finally, one of the most debated and controversial questions is whether some of these creatures can ever be eradicated at all. While extermination campaigns have been launched to wipe out specific nests or colonies, the results have often been short-lived. The creatures seem to re-emerge stronger, more adaptive, and in greater numbers. This has led to grim speculation that the Underhive's monsters are self-perpetuating, part of an unending cycle of destruction and rebirth that cannot be disrupted by conventional means. Some even believe that as long as the Underhive itself endures, so too will its nightmares, an intrinsic and permanent feature of its very existence. These unanswered questions continue to haunt those who venture into the depths, reminding them that the Underhive is more than just a place. It is a living enigma filled with horrors that defy explanation. For every answer found, more mysteries arise, reinforcing the grim reality that the Underhive's most terrifying secrets may never truly be uncovered. The long-term implications of the terrifying monsters inhabiting Necromunda's Underhive extend far beyond the immediate survival struggles of its inhabitants. These creatures, products of mutation, evolution, and human neglect, are slowly reshaping not only the way the Underhive functions, but also its broader significance within the Imperium. The ripple effects of their presence and proliferation could herald dramatic changes, both for Necromunda itself and for other hive worlds that share similar vulnerabilities. One of the most pressing consequences is the inevitable adaptation of the Underhive's human population. Over time, the relentless pressure exerted by these predators will force a fundamental shift in how settlements are structured and maintained. The current model of isolated enclaves, built with salvaged materials and protected by makeshift defenses, may prove unsustainable. Instead, settlements will need to become more integrated, fortified networks, relying on cooperation and shared resources to withstand the growing threat. This could lead to a stronger sense of unity among the disparate factions of the Underhive, but it could also fuel violent clashes as groups compete for control of critical safe zones and choke points. At the same time, the monster's unchecked expansion threatens to destabilize Necromunda's economy. Many of the hive's industries rely on resources harvested from the Underhive, such as rare minerals, chemicals, and archaeotech. If these zones become completely inaccessible due to the spread of predators, the upper hive's industries will face shortages, driving up costs and potentially sparking conflicts between the ruling houses. Over time, the loss of these resources could lead to increased reliance on off-world imports, weakening Necromunda's economic self-sufficiency and reducing its value as a key asset within the Imperium. Another critical concern is the potential for these monsters to spread beyond the confines of Necromunda. The Underhive's labyrinthine tunnels are not entirely isolated. They connect to forgotten transit networks and ancient conduits that could provide pathways to the surface or even off-world locations. If these creatures find their way to other hive worlds or trade routes, they could introduce a new and unpredictable threat to the Imperium at large. Rogue traders and smugglers, drawn by the allure of capturing or trading exotic specimens, may inadvertently aid in this spread. The arrival of Necromunda's predators on other worlds could create localized ecological disasters, further straining the Imperium's already fragile infrastructure. The psychological impact of these creatures also has long-term implications. As stories of their terrifying abilities spread throughout Necromunda and beyond, they erode morale and foster a culture of fear. In a society already burdened by oppression and constant hardship, the looming threat of an unstoppable predator adds yet another layer of despair. Over time, this could lead to a breakdown in the will to resist other threats, such as rebellion, Xenos invasions, or even chaos incursions. Conversely, it may harden the resolve of certain groups, pushing them to develop new technologies, strategies, and doctrines to combat these monstrosities. Whether this innovation comes at a cost to human life and resources remains an open question. One intriguing possibility is the evolution of warfare within the Underhive. The presence of such lethal predators has already altered the tactics of gangs, enforcers, and other combatants. Over the coming decades, this shift could result in the emergence of a new form of guerrilla warfare, one designed to exploit the creature's strengths and weaknesses. Gangs may weaponize these monsters against one another, luring predators into rival territories or breeding smaller, more controllable creatures as living weapons. While this approach could tip the balance of power within the Underhive, it also risks further destabilizing the ecosystem, creating even deadlier hybrid threats. For the Imperium as a whole, the long-term significance of Necromunda's monsters lies in the lessons they offer. Lessons that may be ignored until it is too late. The Underhive serves as a grim warning of what happens when industrial expansion, genetic experimentation, and environmental degradation are allowed to proceed unchecked. The creatures are not just threats, they are the physical manifestation of humanity's hubris and neglect. If other hive worlds continue to follow the same trajectory, it is only a matter of time before similar monstrosities arise elsewhere, threatening the fragile stability of the Imperium's urban strongholds. Paradoxically, these horrors could also serve as a catalyst for change. The fear they instill may push Necromunda's rulers to invest in long-overdue reforms, such as improved infrastructure, stricter containment protocols for hazardous materials, and enhanced defensive measures for vulnerable zones. These changes, while costly, could set a precedent for other hive worlds to follow, helping to mitigate the risks of similar outbreaks. However, given the Imperium's tendency to prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability, such reforms are far from guaranteed. The potential for these creatures to be exploited by external forces cannot be overlooked. Rogue Mechanicus factions, gene cults, and even chaos warbands may take an interest in harnessing the monster's unique traits for their own purposes. The bioadaptive properties of some predators could be used to develop new forms of biological warfare, while the regenerative abilities observed in others might inspire forbidden genetic experiments. Such exploitation could escalate the threat posed by these creatures, turning them from localized predators into tools of galactic-scale destruction. In a broader sense, the long-term legacy of Necromunda's Underhive monsters lies in their symbolic value. They represent the fragility of humanity's dominance in a universe filled with threats both external and internal. Their existence serves as a reminder that the Imperium's greatest enemies are often the ones it creates for itself, whether through negligence, greed, or the unrelenting pursuit of progress at any cost. As long as the conditions that gave rise to these creatures persist, the Underhive will remain a crucible of horror, a place where humanity's darkest impulses are given form. Ultimately, the monsters of Necromunda are not just a threat to those who dwell in the Hive's depths. They are harbingers of a future shaped by the consequences of humanity's excesses and failures. Whether that future will see the Imperium learn from these mistakes or succumb to them remains to be seen. One thing is certain: the creatures of the Underhive will continue to evolve, adapt, and endure, serving as both a challenge and a mirror to the Imperium's own struggles to survive in an unforgiving galaxy.